In the last section, you got a chance to play with the basics of React. We made a simple application that had some user interaction, showed new data, and it had a few separate components. And in this section, we're not going to be focusing on adding new features to our app. We're going to be focusing on improving it via changing the directory structure and introducing a few awesome tools. Now, before we get into what we're going to do, let's talk about why we're going to do it. We're going to explore the current problems with the project as it stands from the first section. One of the first issues inside of index.html is the 3 script tags. This is perfectly fine if you're going through a simple example, but if you're going to be deploying your code to production and you're going to be working with React, it's going to be best to manage your third-party dependencies using npm. It's also going to decrease the amount of requests for JavaScript files we have to make. Right now, we're making 4 separate requests. After we're done this section, we'll simply be making 1 request. The second problem is this line right here. Inside of app.jsx, we use JSX code as well as some ES6 features which aren't available in the browser by default. And that's awesome. That's totally fine. The problem is that we convert this code into regular JavaScript live inside of the browser, and that can be very time-consuming and expensive. Ideally, we would have all of this code converted before we ever start the server. When the server gets started and Express is listening for visitors to our app, the file is already ready to go. As soon as someone wants it, they can simply request it. The third problem is in app.jsx. Right now, we have our 3 components all inside of one file, as well as the code that actually initializes our application. And this is a pretty big problem. Right now, it's definitely fine, but in the future, as we start introducing testing in our React components, it's going to be a lot harder to isolate individual components. What we want to do is break all of these out into separate files that can easily be loaded in and reused. So those are the 3 big problems with our current application structure. And to fix them, we're going to use something called Webpack. Now, maybe you've heard of Webpack before. If you haven't, that's all right. We're going to be exploring it in detail in the next 4 to 5 videos. Webpack is going to let us bundle all of our third-party dependencies, like React and React DOM, and Babel, along with our application code, like our greeter message, greeter form, and our greeter class. It's also going to let us break our code, these components, into separate files, and we'll be able to include them kind of like we do in Server.js when we require Express. We'll be able to use the require keyword, or another keyword I'll show you, in order to load in a module and use it. Having separate files for everything is going to make testing and scaling a lot easier. All right, so we explored the problem. We also have a solution. Let's go ahead and set up our project in order to actually make some progress. And in this video, to wrap things up, all we're going to be doing is installing a few things in the command line. It's going to be a little boring and tedious, but I promise we're getting it all out of the way right now. So in the next 4 to 5 videos, we can really get moving and work on creating the app instead of managing all our dependencies. To kick things off, over inside of the terminal, we're going to be running 3 separate commands to install a few things on your machine that we're going to need before we can start updating our project. The first one we're going to run is npm install. We're going to be adding the G flag, which installs the module globally, and the module is Webpack at version 1.12.3. So the G flag is going to install the module in a way that lets us run Webpack from the terminal. It's not going to update our package.json file or add the code into our local node modules folder. Instead, it's going to give us access to it right in the terminal, which is exactly what we want. Now, if you are on Linux or Mac, this is installing something new on your machine, so you're going to want to go ahead and use the sudo keyword beforehand. If you're on Windows, the sudo keyword doesn't exist, and you shouldn't run into any issues when you're installing. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. It's going to install Webpack globally, and it should only take a few seconds. The next thing we're going to be doing is installing React and React DOM. Those are our 2 main libraries that we want to use inside of our project. All right, it looks like we're done now and everything went well. We can test that Webpack was installed by running webpack-h, which is going to show us a list of all the arguments available. And if you see something like this, then you're done. The next thing we're going to run is npm install, this time using the save flag. This is going to update the package.json file, telling the project what version of the modules you want to have installed. In this case, we're going to be installing React at version 0.14.7, and we also want to install a second module, so we can simply type space, specify the module name, which is React DOM, and then the version number at 0.14.7. Now I'm going to go ahead and run that command from the terminal. It's going to grab our dependencies, shove them in the node modules folder, and also update the package.json file. And right here, you can see we have React and React DOM. The next thing and the last thing we want to install is all of our local dependencies that are for development purposes only. This is going to be stuff like Babel and Webpack that we don't need in production, but we do want to use in order to generate our files. And I know that's a little confusing now, I promise. I'll tell you exactly what that means in the next 2 videos. But for now, just follow along. npm install. We're using save dev this time. I'll show you what that does in just 1 second. First thing we're going to do is install Webpack, which might seem a little redundant, but it does need to be installed locally in order to work properly. The version we're looking for is 1.12.13. Up next is going to be Babel-core version 6.5.1. Then Babel-loader. This one is going to be at version 6.2.2. Up next is Babel-preset-ES 2015 at version 6.5.0. And last but not least is Babel-preset-react. And this one is at version 6.5.0 as well. Now, once your command looks like this, you can go ahead and hit enter. And I know it's a little unwieldy, but I promise if you've done this, then you're done. There's no need to type any more install commands for the rest of this section. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. It's going to go off and grab all our dependencies, which are going to be installed inside of our node modules folder. Only this time, things are going to turn out a little differently inside of the package.json file. Inside of package.json, once this command is done, we're going to see that a dev dependencies section has been added, where we're going to manage our development dependencies, which are only required locally on our machine. And in the future, when we deploy to a service like Heroku, which lets us host the app, we're going to be basically telling npm not to install these ones. So as you can see, we have dependencies and dev dependencies. Dependencies are things we want when we're running in production, and dev dependencies are for local development only. Now with this in place, we're ready to move on to the next video where we actually start using Webpack and we make some really awesome changes to our Hello React project. One thing to note, you don't want to keep the node modules folder around when you're using something like version control, which I'll be introducing in a couple of videos. So just to show you, you can completely delete the node modules folder. And using this information, we can reinstall everything that was in there. By simply running npm install from the terminal, npm is going to find your package.json file. It's going to get all of your modules at the proper version, and it's going to regenerate the node modules folder. So there's no need to get worried if that folder gets deleted or destroyed. It can easily be regenerated. And you can see the command is going to take a little while because it is installing quite a few things, but once it's done, your project will be back to the exact same state it started in. That's it for this video. I'll see you next time where we explore a few more interesting things and actually start making changes to our project. And just to prove to you, here's our node modules folder again with all of our dependencies and its dependencies installed.